Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Numchet. Today's daf is dedicated in memory of Lieutenant Hadar Golden Zichrono Livracha, who will finally be brought to burial today after 11 long years. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Okay, we're going to get started with the sixth chapter. Okay, I managed to get access to, I'm very excited to report, to the Machana Mikdash images. And now I can share them in the videos, which is amazing. They now have the map that we always refer to that many of you order back in Yoma. First of all, you can order it from Machana Mikdash. It's very useful. I highly recommend having it when you learn. You also now, which is new, you can buy it digitally. So that way you don't have to wait for the mail and pay for the shipping. And then if you want, you can print it yourself. So you can order it digitally. It's 10 shekel or $3. I'll put a link for it in the description of the YouTube today, and we'll send it out also in the WhatsApp groups for people who want. It's a supremely useful tool. Okay, highly recommended using it for this Masechet, for other Masechtot that we've already learned, that we will learn next cycle, and also that we're going to get to. Like when we get to Midot and all the Midot of the temple, it's going to be very useful. Okay, so that's first of all. The second thing we have today are diagrams that I sketched out that are, for better or worse, it was the best way I could come up with doing it. So we'll use those also as well in class today. And today you're going to see, even though I am telling you that these maps are very useful, you're going to see the limitation of the maps because they can't change and they can't show different opinions. I mean, theoretically, they could have made them with a bunch of different opinions, but they decided to make the map in one opinion. And today, one of the major things we're going to discuss is where was the Mizbeach situated on the north-south line? Was it on the north side completely? Was it partly in the north, partly in the south? Was it completely in the south? So there's going to be a whole debate about that, and that you're going to see from the map that the map actually doesn't really look to scale like any of the opinions that we saw, which is interesting in of itself, but that's on the note of the map. So I will share my screen when needed, and I will show you all both the diagrams and the map that will be useful for our purposes. Okay, kodshei kodshim. We're starting now with the Mishnah. We have kodshei kodshim, sheshachatan berosh mizbeach. What if you slaughter them? We learned the kodshei kodshim have to be slaughtered on the north side of the Azara. Okay, so maybe right now we'll already just share screen, and we'll look at the map, and we will see. Let's just have to fix this, do that. Okay, now we're going to share screen, and we're going to see the map. Okay, so we have the altar. Okay, so you walk in. Here's the women's courtyard. It's called the Ezrat Nashim in Hebrew. You walk in from the east. You get now to the altar. When you walk in, right, you walk in now the eastern gate, the Shar Nikanor. It's called the Nikanor's gate. You walk into the Azara. This whole yellow part is the Azara, right? If you remember the Acharei Beit HaKapora, for example, that we talked about, is right here in the back there behind the Holy of Holies, that area. Okay, so we have this map. Now, what we said that you have to slaughter on the north side. North side, okay, and here we have the rings. These were actually the slaughtering rings because they're really, if you remember, we had different opinions. What is, right? It said al yerach hamizbeach tzafona on the side of the altar to the north. So that's this whole area in the north. Okay, this is, if you go, the north is again on the bottom of this map, even though we normally think of north as top. That's the way they decide to do the map. I really don't want to turn it upside down, even though people suggested it, because then all the words are upside down, especially now that I can share screen and you can actually read the words. So here you have what's called the Beit HaMikbachayim, the slaughtering area, and you see it's on the north. What if you wanted to slaughter at the top of the altar? Okay, now here you can see it's situated mostly in the south side of the altar, a little bit juts out into the north. Okay, according to this map. Because I want you to understand this is very important to today, the sanctuary and the ulam, which is if you continue past the altar, you're going to get up. These are steps that lead up to the ulam. The ulam is this hall, they call it the front hall, that leads into the sanctuary. This is the part that's covered. All this stuff in brown is covered. Okay, this was closed as opposed to this whole area was open. It's fun having the map and you can really show well. Then this whole, what's important to understand is this is centered in the room. The ulam and the heichal are completely centered. So if you draw a line, right, like all I could think about when I was learning this stuff is, the way if you're doing something in Canva or in Photoshop or whatever it is, you could drop a line in the center and then you know exactly where center is, right? So here, I can't really do that, but we're going to do that on my diagrams, where you basically have a line that goes straight through here, and that's the center of the room. That cuts off the north-south line. So that's very important to understand. So now, okay, let's put all that aside right now. Now we want to know, what if you slaughtered on top of the altar? at the top. No, it's not really meant for slaughtering. You can see here, I zoomed in a little too much, it's hard to read it, but there's a large wood pile at the top. That's where you basically do, and that's on the east side near the entrance. That's where you do the burning of the sacrifices. There's the incense wood pile, which we're going to call today, it's called there's the Maracha Rishonah. Maracha is arrangement of wood. That's the big one. Then there's the Maracha Shniya, the second one, which is the incense one. We're going to talk about that today, where they would basically burn a fire to be able to bring coals to burn the incense. Where was the incense burnt? Inside the sanctuary. Okay? So you would bring the wood, the coals from this pile into the sanctuary. Now, this is just background for later today, so I'm already mentioning it since we're here. This second wood pile is actually on the southwest corner. Why is it important it's on the west corner? Because it's closer than the other wood pile to the sanctuary. Okay, and we're going to see because why does it make sense? And we're going to see a whole source about this. It makes sense because if you're going to bring it in to, right, it's first of all, it's just logical. And we want to make right, anything that goes into out, we're going to do it as close as possible. We learned about that when we took the blood from the incense altar, from the inner altar, the golden altar that was inside. What did we do? We took the blood from there on the Chataot Pnimiyot, remember the inner sin offerings, and we took the blood and we put it in the base of the altar on the west, right, on the side that's closest to the exit. The Torah said, remember, Petach Ol Moed, right? You have to go right out and go as close as possible. Same thing when you're going to bring the coals inside. We want it to be closer. So that's why that wood pile is there. Anyway, a lot more about that later today. So now the question becomes, what if you did your kodshei on the top of this altar? Now, we don't know yet, even though this is why I said the map is tricky. We see where the map puts it. But we don't know yet. Assume you have no idea. Is the Mizbeach in the north? Is it in the south? Is it half-half? We don't know. So according to this Mishna, okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute because it's not so relevant anymore. Rabbi Yosi Omer, Ki'ilu nishchatu b'tzafon. He says it's as if they're slaughtered in the north. Which, notice his wording, it's as if. It sounds like it's actually not slaughtered in the north. It's as if it's slaughtered in the north, but more on that soon. Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mechatzia Mizbeach v'ledarom kidarom, Mechatzia Mizbeach v'letzafon kitzafon. Half the altar, meaning the one that's more toward the north, and possibly in the north, we don't know, is like the north. The other side is like the south, meaning you can do it on the altar, you can slaughter, but you can slaughter only on the north half. The northern half, which again doesn't necessarily have to be in the north, it's just to the direction of the north. That half, if you made a line right in the center of the Mizbeach, half yes, half no. Now we don't know what this is based on, and we're going to see. So I see your question, Adina, is the maracha the wood pile? Yes, wood pile is maracha. Maracha means arrangement of wood. So they call it in English here the wood pile. I don't know why, but I would call it the arrangement, right? The wood arrangement as a more direct translation. Amar Rav Asi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Omer haya Rabbi Yosi, kule mizbeach b'tzafon kai. So Rav Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Yosi, who's the Rabbi Yosi in our Mishnah, now don't get confused. There's Rabbi Yosi, there's Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, Rabbi Yosi Stam is Rabbi Yosi ben Chalafta. Okay, so the Rabbi Yosi, who listed as Rabbi Yosi, who says you can do it on the whole altar as if it was slaughtered in the north, well, he actually holds the Kulim is back with Safon Kai. The entire altar was in the north. Okay, now I'm going to start sharing my diagrams. Okay, and for this, share my diagrams. Okay. So we have in the diagrams here, okay, here's the Hechal. Okay, get familiar with this diagram because we're going to have a lot of different variations of it today, and then we're going to have different variations of it tomorrow as well. So here's my map, okay? So it's kind of similar, right? Mizrach is at the bottom here, Ma'arav is at the top, Darom is on the left, and Safon is on the right, okay? It's a little different shape just because that's my thing was this way. I did it like this, okay? So I hope that doesn't confuse you too much. But here's the Hechal, the sanctuary. Here's the Ulam in front of it. Now, there's a few extra details that we didn't talk about yet, which will be relevant later, which is the opening of the Hechal is 10 cubits. The opening of the Ulam, the hallway area, is double the size. It's 20 cubits. So why do I have 5 and 5 and 10 and 10? Because here's our center line, okay? In this diagram, I was able to put a center line right down the middle. So this is the center, and 5 of the opening is on one side, 5 is on the other, 10 of the Ulam and 10 of the Ulam, okay? That's just important for later, not yet, but I'll already point it out. If you say the Mizbeach is completely in the north, he says that's Rabbi Yosi's opinion. He doesn't say where he gets it from, Okay, but Rav Asi assumes right now that he must get it from our Mishnah. Makes sense. If the kodshei that you slaughtered at the top of the altar is as if they're slaughtered in the north, it's because the Mizbeach is completely in the north. Now, there's one issue there, which is what? Why does it say ki'ilu, as if they were slaughtered in the north? It should be they are because they are slaughtered in the north. So he says umay ki'ilu. So Rav Asi quotes Rabbi Yochanan saying, Omer ya Rabbi Yosi kulim Mizbeach b'tzafon kai. Now he says, well, if you want to look at our Mishnah and say if the whole thing's in the north, then why does he have to say ki'ilu? Well, ma'u detema be'inan al yerech v'leika. You might have thought that you need it to be next to the altar because it says in the pasuk, where do you slaughter the kodshei? Remember this? Al yerech hamizbech, on the side of the altar to the north, right? So you might say, well, on the altar is not to the side of the altar. Maybe it's no good. That's why he says it's as if it was slaughtered in the north. However, it's because, now, this is the key word. It's because, according to Rav Asi, it's because he says, and that's how did Rabbi Yochanan get it from Rabbi Yosi? Because he said it in our Mishnah, since you can slaughter on the whole altar must be on the north. Now that's very important to get because soon Rabbi Zera is going to say that's just not true. He might hold Mizbeach is in the north, but it's not learned out from our Mishnah. Okay? Rav Asi connects it to our Mishnah. He says, why else would he allow slaughtering kodshei in the north if not the whole Mizbeach is situated in the north? Now, so again, Ma'utim, you might have thought you need al yerech v'leik, and you don't have that. Kamash malan, that's why he says it's as if it's in the north, even though it's on top of the altar, it's still going to be an okay slaughtering. It's still going to be considered kodshei. Okay. Someone just accidentally wrote on this. I don't know if you can undo that, Frida, maybe. I don't know. Just accidentally wrote on it. I should really close the annotations. I don't know how to do that, but okay. Thank you for erasing. Okay. Now, Amalei Rabbi Zera le Rav Asi. So Rabbi Zera now says to Rav Asi, Ela me'ata. Now from here, le Rabbi Yosi. So now Rabbi Zera is going to say to Rav Asi, there is no way that this is the case. Okay? Why is this not the case? Because there's no way that you could infer from our Mishnah, and that's the reason why Rabbi Yosi says you could do it that you could slaughter on the altar because the altar is in the north. Because the corollary to that, if you say that, you're going to have to say the same thing about the next opinion, which is what? Elamayata, Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, who says half the altar you can use and half the altar you can't use. Well, Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, you're going to have to say the same thing then. It's all connected, meaning, well, then you'd have to say that according to Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, half the Mizbeach is in the north and half is in the south, right? Because if you're going to say the reason why he only allows slaughtering on half is because that half is in the north as opposed to Rabbi Yosi who thinks the whole thing is in the north, that would be the simplest way to understand our Mishnah. But you're going to have a problem with that, Rabbi Zera says. Rabbi Zera goes out against Rav Asi and says there's no way that that's the case because you yourself said, okay, you quoted Rabbi Yochanan as saying something that contradicts that. So let's read. So what? Maybe it is. Maybe, just like, again, let's just go up for a second. Just like Rabbi Yosi said you could slaughter on the entire altar because the whole altar is situated in the north. Likewise, Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda says you can only slaughter on the northern half because the northern half is in the north. Okay? If you want to say that, you're the one who said, Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan, you quoted Rabbi Yochanan as saying the following words, and that's going to make it clear that Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think it's half situated in the north and half in the south. Mode Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, she'im shachatan kinegdam bekarka psulot. He agrees. While he allows you to slaughter on top of the altar, he doesn't allow you to slaughter underneath the altar. Now, what's underneath the altar, we don't understand yet. The Gemara is going to get back to that. But the main point is that you would have to say that according to Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, let's go to diagram number 3, the Mizbeach is completely on the south side. Because what does he say? If you slaughter under the altar, that's no good because you're not in the north, because you're in the south. We only allow you, there's a special dispensation, okay, I'm going to make like a box here, that on the northern half of the altar, which is in the south, but because it's the northern half of the altar, if you're on top of the altar, you can slaughter on top there. Now, why? We're going to see this in a minute. But the main point being, before we get to the next line, we're going to, basically, what Rav Asi is going to then change his tone and say, okay, I'm changing what I said. I'm going to explain a different reason for the debate between Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda. It's not that this one said north because the altar's in the north, and this one said half of it is okay because half the altar is in the north. No, there's there's two different issues going on here. One is, can you slaughter on top of the Mizbeach? The other is, where's the Mizbeach situated? And they're not connected to each other. Okay? That's basically the main point here. So, Amarle, Hachi Ka'amar Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, now we don't really need our screens anymore for exactly the reason we don't need the diagrams, because one has nothing to do with the other. Now we're just going to explain right now in this part of the sugya, and later we'll get to how we know that Rabbi Yosi says it's in the north. But again, I want to get facts here. Facts are Rabbi Yochanan said that according to Rabbi Yosi, we slaughter the Mizbeach is situated completely in the north. But what we just did, and Rav Asi thought to connect that with our Mishnah, we now just disconnected it. Okay, so there's two machlokot. One is, can you slaughter at the top of the altar, on all of it or on half of it? And one is, where's the Mizbeach situated? And those two are completely different machlokot, not dependent on each other. So Amarle, so Rav Asi, after Rabbi Zera questions him, says, Hachi Kama Rabbi Yochanan, this is really what Rabbi Yochanan said. Shneim mikra achad darshu. They both darshaned the same pasuk in a different way. You have to really read the beginning, so I'm going to first quote you the beginning of the pasuk. It's Shemot, chapter 20, verse 21. Mizbeach adama ta'aseh. Make for me an altar, a mizbeach of the ground, okay? V'zavachta alecha et olotecha, et shlamecha, et sonecha, et karecha, etc. And slaughter on top of them what? Your burnt offerings and your peace offerings. Now, burnt offerings, kodshei, only in the north. Peace offerings, kodshim kalim, even anywhere in the Asara. Okay, that's just some basic background facts. Now notice what it says. So it says zavachta. Zavachta means to slaughter. This basically is telling you, even though the altar is not really meant for slaughtering, that you could slaughter on them because it says zavachta. Zavachta. Now zavachta could be a general word, but we've seen that it really means often slaughter. So now they're each going to darshan this pasuk in a different way. Rabbi Yosi savar kulo la'ola v'kulo l'shlamim. When it says do your burnt offerings or your peace offerings, it means the whole thing you can use, whether you want for burnt offerings, whether you want for peace offerings. The entire altar is at your disposal. That's really the simple reading of the verse. Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda Sabal, chetzio la'ola v'chetzio l'shlamim. Exactly. Olotecha and ashlamecha. Half for olot, half for shlamim. Now, where does he get this from? Well, the isa kadatach kula ola kasher. Now, if you wanted to say the whole thing, you can slaughter olot on it, which is limited already in general to north. If you want to say, well, the chiddush of this pasuk is you can even slaughter your olot on top of the altar. It's still considered north, right? You're much more limited in where you can slaughter your olot. So hasha kula la ola kasher. If you're going to say the whole altar is kosher for ola, which is what Rabbi Yosi said, kula l'shlamim mebaya. You don't need to say you can use the whole thing for shlamim. It's if shlamim, right, can be brought in the entire sanctuary, in the entire azara, right? If this whole yellow area you can use shlamim, do shlamim, and just in this area of the north, the small area, you could do olot, and then you come and say the pasuk says, well, the olot you can also do on top of the altar. Of course, you could do the shlamim on top of the altar. So therefore, why did it say olotecha and shlamecha? The only reason to add shlamecha, according to Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, is to say half of the altar is for ola and the other half is for shlamim. And that's how he understands the verse. Okay? Idach, what's Rabbi Yosi going to say to that? Because Rabbi Yosi says the whole thing is for olot and also shlamim. But why do you need to say shlamecha then, according to him? Well, idach itzrich. No, you needed it because you might have thought sal kadat hachamina olahu didachik le makom. Maybe they allowed, now theoretically, okay, even if you say the whole azara is available for slaughtering, okay, again, this whole yellow area, still you might have thought maybe not on the altar. The altar is not really meant for slaughtering. So now what are you going to say? The fact that the Torah says, let's say it just said olot, slaughter your olot on there. You might say, look, the Torah made a special dispensation for the olot, the burnt offerings. Why? Well, we're very limited. That's what it means, dachik le makom. There's not a lot of space to slaughter olot. So what if there's a lot of korbanot olah that need to be slaughtering, and we need to overlap, we need to go somewhere else, and we don't have enough room in the north? So let's go up on top of the altar. Let's allow that. But shlamim, right? But shlamim, you have so much other space. Why use the altar, which is designated for so many other things? Why use the altar for slaughtering? Just go to some corner, right, in the back here and go slaughter your shlamim. So maybe shlamim wouldn't have been allowed. Kamash malan. That's why I had to tell you, olot and shlamim. So now we understand, like I said before, according to Rav Asi, take two, the whole issue of the machloket between where on the altar you can slaughter or not, do you have the whole thing or not, it has to do with the drasha on the pasuk, and it has absolutely nothing to do with where in the mizbeach is situated. Theoretically, it could be in the south, and you can still do it because one is not connected to the other. In general, you need north for kodshei kodashim, but there's a special pasuk that says you can slaughter your olot on top of the altar wherever it is, right? Whether it's in the south, whether it's in the north. So doesn't, right? That's not connected. Again, we still have the statement of Rabbi Yochanan that according to Rabbi Yosi, the Mizbech is not as we see it here, but it's completely in the north. We're going to get to this whole machloket in a few minutes, but I want you to understand first, when we talk about where is the Mizbech situated, we're only talking about the square part of the Mizbech, not the ramp. The ramp is clearly in the south, okay? Nobody thinks otherwise. The ramp is clearly in the south. We're talking about the big base of the altar that we've learned already is 32 cubits by 32 cubits. It's going to be important today to remember how big it is, and it's exactly 32 cubits because we're going to do a whole numbers game today. Okay. Someone in the Hebrew Shiur said that her son said to her, "Why are you having a math class in the morning here? What's going on?" So that's going to be the end of our Shiur. Okay, Gufa. Now we want to go into the statement that Rav Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, this small statement that was a side point. We want to understand it. Modeh Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, she'im shechatan kenegdam bekarka psulot. If you would slaughter on the ground under the altar, it's disqualified, and that's how we knew that he definitely doesn't think that the Mizbeach is anywhere in the north. We thought half in the north, because if you slaughter on the ground, it won't work. Why won't it work? Because it's not north. Okay, only on top we're going to allow it to work, but not underneath. So Amalei Ravachim Difti Ravina. Ravachi of Difti says to Ravina, "My kenegdam bekarka. What are you talking about? What space is there under the altar? The altar is built on the ground. There is no space under the ground where you could do it. Maybe what we mean is the ground where the yesod is or the sovev. In other words, you're closer to the ground than you're on the top, right? So there's that ledge that comes out protruding at 6 cubits height, or the sovev 1 cubit high. But you can't say that's kenegdam bekarka because hai gufei mizbechu. That's part of the altar. That's the altar. That's not the ground underneath it. The od, and also if you would say that my kenegdam bekarka, they're not in the ground. You would have to have something on the ground. V'chitema, option 2, da'avid michilot bekarka v'shachabu. Maybe we're talking about if you were to make underground tunnels under the altar and slaughter there, and that's what we're talking about. V'chi agavna mihavi mizbeach. That you can't have tunnels under the altar. It's a problem. Okay, there's no such thing as an altar above tunnels. How do we know that? Vahatanya. Going back to our pasuk, okay, they're quoting a bright on that pasuk. Mizbach adama ta'aseli. She'ehem mechubar me adama. Has to be attached to the ground. Shelo lo agabe mechilot v'lo agabe kipin. You can't do it on top of tunnels. You can't do it on top of arches. Has to be mamash on the ground. Okay, so what could it possibly be? Third possibility and answer, lo tzricha debatre b'tzurei. What we mean is, if you shorten the mizbeach somehow, you made it smaller than 32 by 32, let's say it was 28 by 28, and then you wanted to use the space that was where on the ground, where once there was an altar, and now it's, and basically saying you can't do it there. Why not? Because it's not in the north. Okay, and that's how we know that he doesn't think it's half-half. Okay, and he thinks the whole thing is actually in the south. Okay. Now we get to the big part of our sugya that's going to lead us already even into tomorrow's daf. Amar Rabbi Zera. So now Rabbi Zera comes. So we've now split these two issues, and what we really tackled so far was the issue that we said that the where the mizbeach is situated is not connected to where can I slaughter the sacrifices. Can I slaughter the sacrifices on half the altar or on the whole altar? That all has to do with the machloket about how to understand the pasuk. Vasita alav olotecha ve'at. But now Rabbi Zera comes and says, but Rabbi Yochanan did say that according to Rabbi Yosi, the Mizbeach is situated completely in the north. Comes Rabbi Zera and he says, could it possibly be that Rabbi Yochanan, what he says is right, and there's no Mishna about it? Now, Rabbi Yochanan comes and says Rabbi Yosi holds the Mizbeach is in the north, but I've never seen this anywhere. It doesn't appear in any Mishnah. How could that be? What he's going to do is he's going to bring in a Mishnah bring in a braita on that Mishnah and try to say, look, that Mishnah is actually proving that Mishnah can only be explained according to Rabbi Yosi and only explained if you say it's in the north. So it's going to take us a very long time for this argument. We're going to do from now till the end of the daf is bring his whole long argument. At the end, someone's going to suggest maybe it's someone else's opinion and I can explain it differently. Okay, so after he struggles to explain it in so many ways, we're then going to suggest maybe someone else. And starting at the very bottom of today's daf, which we'll really leave for tomorrow, we're going to have Rav Shravia who suggests another way to understand that Mishnah. But Rabbi Zera is going to make a big, strong effort to try to prove from this Mishnah. So nafik dak eshkach. So he went out, he sat and really tried to think about it, and he found it. Ditnan. It says in the Mishnah in Tamid, Masechet Tamid, Bereru misham atzei te'ena yafim l'sader maracha shniya shel ketoret. So we go back to that maracha shniya of ketoret. Okay, so we say, and now I'm going to share the map. Okay, so if you have a map, you can look at the map. So this maracha shniya, this wood pile. Okay. So what would they make it with? Atzei te'ena, wood from a fig tree. Many people say some of the commentators say it's tikkun of Adam Rishon. He used the leaves of the fig to, him and his wife to cover themselves. Okay. Anyway, so they would take atzei te'ena yafim to lisader ma'aracha shniya shel ketoret. Okay, that's what we call this, the ketoret incense pile, the incense pile. Kineged Keren Maravit Romi. Now, where is it? And this is kind of where they show it here, although it's not exactly the scale, but it's opposite the Keren Maravit Romi. It's by the southwest corner of the altar. Okay, that's here. Mashuch mina keren chalpei tzafon arba amot. Now, walk from the edge of the altar, 4 cubits. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it looks a little more here. Okay, and you get to the wood pile. Okay, that's where it is. Be'omer 5 se'im kalim, they put approximately 5 se'im of coals on there. By the way, that's how much it produced. That's and as they put enough wood, it would produce that many coals. That's about 35 liters. Okay, approximately. That's a lot. Uba Shabbat, be'omer 8 se'im kalim. On Shabbat, they needed more because on Shabbat, we're going to talk about this soon. They would also, one thing this was used for, I told you, is to bring coals inside to the incense altar when they burnt the incense twice a day. The other thing is the showbread was on, right? The lechem apanim was on a table inside the sanctuary. And every week you would put 12 loaves and you would switch them on Shabbat. And there were 2 bowls, bezichim, of levona, of frankincense. And then you would offer those, you would take the frankincense out every week when you switched it. You'd take the bread out. And then you would take the frankincense out and you would burn it on this pile. So some would be brought inside and some from inside outside. Okay, that's going to be important in another minute. Okay, Shashama Yunotnim Shnei Bezechei Levona Shalechem Apanim. Okay, on Shabbat they needed it for these Lechem Apanim, and that's why they needed more wood than normal. Umay Simana. Now, what is my Simana? Well, how do we get really that this was used, that this has to be where it was? Okay, comes Rabbi Yosi to explain Rabbi Yosi. Okay, so now how do you explain this? Because it goes according to Rabbi Yosi's opinion. So we took this Mishnah, and now we're going to say, how do we explain this Mishnah? What we really want to get to, and this is why it's going to become mathematical. Why is it 4 cubits in? Okay, so the answer is, it's Rabbi Yosi, he did Tanya, turning out Amud Beg. Rabbi Yosi Omer, Zeh Siman. This is how you understand it. Kol hanital bifnim linaten b'chutz, eino nitan ela b'samuch. She'ein lifnim hemenu. You have to add a word here. Anything brought from the inside, outside. Okay, that's the bezichei levona, the frankincense. They're brought from the inside, outside. You're going to do it as close to the exit as possible. This is just like we talked about the blood from the altar. You're going to want to be, now here it's a problem with our picture, because you're not exactly in that southwest corner, that incense wood pile. You would have put it really on the northwest side, not 4 cubits northward. You would put it way more, okay? And this is why it's going to make a difference where the Mizbeach is situated. Because what you want to do is you want to shorten your path to get as quickly as you can from inside to outside, and from outside to inside, we're going to say. In other words, again, if you're going to take something outside, which we're going to take the coals from this wood pile and bring them inside, you're going to want it to be as close as possible to the sanctuary and to the entrance to the ulam, basically. So we want it in the closest possible spot, Rabbi Yosi says, or this is what this Braita says, right? That Rabbi Yosi said we want to bring it as close as possible. Now we're going to put two and two together. If it needs to be as close as possible, then look at our picture. If Rabbi Yosi explains it needs to be as close as possible, and that's why it's 4 cubits off, well, the Mizbeach has to be much more toward the north if you want to make that make sense. And we're going to get into all the numbers soon. Before we get to the numbers, we're going to actually explain something that we already just explained, but that's because we know it already. But we want to now explain this brighta that said everything that's going, right, that's taken from inside, outside, and then also from outside to inside. What are we talking about? So first they say what's going from inside to outside, which we know already is the frankincense, the bowls of frankincense. But right now, as if, let's assume we don't know it, mind you. Ilema shirayim. Well, there's two things that go from inside to outside. We talked about the blood from the incense altar, right? From the Mizbeach HaZahav, the incense altar. There we put the blood of those, the par and the seir on Yom Kippur and the par Kohen Gadol and all those. Okay, par and Devar Shel Tzibur. So if you want to say the remainder of the blood, because remember, you put the blood on the altar there and also in all the other places that you put it. And then you walk out and then you put it on, right? You then bring it to the Yesod. And then where do you put it? Remember, on the Maravi side, because you want to be as close as possible. We saw this in the Pasuk. So the Gemara says, yeah, well, that's not what Rabbi Yosi is talking about, because we saw it in a Pasuk. You don't need Rabbi Yosi to tell you something that's completely obvious from a verse in the Torah. Right? It says exactly there. What do you do with the blood of the par? You bring it to the Yesod of the Mizbeach, which is right opposite Ol Moed, which means basically on the west side. So that's not what the Brite is talking about. And if you say that it's talking about the blood, right? Still, you need an explanation for what exactly are you bringing inside? If you say, right? What's the other thing we bring inside? Remember, the Kohen Gadol walks with the coals in his hand and the incense, right? He's got incense in one hand, the coals in the other, and he brings all of it into the kodashim so he can make, right? He makes that smoke in the kodashim. Well, that also says explicitly. So it says he takes it. Now, they didn't redo the important part of the pasuk. Milifnei Hashem, from before God, meaning from as close as possible to where God's presence is, which means take it from this wood pile, which is going to be as close as possible. So those two things it can't be talking about because those two things appear explicitly in psukim, and we don't need a Tana to tell us something that appears explicitly in a pasuk. Ela must mean, and this is what I already explained to you, what's inside that's going outside? Those two bowls of the frankincense that are coming from inside on the shulchan, on the table, and they're being brought outside. That's why we need this pile to be as close as possible. And how do we know? Now, why, where do we get, what's the precedent for this? Oh, the obvious precedent is Digamri Mishirayim. In other words, the Shirayim, the remainder of the blood, it's said explicitly in a verse. From there, this Braita was hatched, basically. It says, that built the paradigm that anything else that's not written explicitly in the Pasuk, that it has to go right away to the closest place, well, it obviously is going to go to the closest place because we build a paradigm from the blood from the inner altar, just like it has to go Petach Ol Moed immediately when you get out. Also, the busy Levona are going to have to go to the closest place, so make sure that wood pile is close. And what's hanital bifnim linatem bifnim bachutz linatem bifnim? What's going from outside to inside? This we already said. Gechalim de kol yoma v'yoma. The coals for every day for the burning of the incense that goes inside. How do we know it has to be close? Well, same thing. Degamri migechalim shel yom kippurim. Where else do we have something going inside? The coals for Yom Kippur. So just like that has to be opposite because the Torah said so. That built the paradigm for this. Okay. That was that point. Okay. Now we're going to get to the complicated part about, it's not so complicated, and hopefully the pictures will help you, about where the Mizbeach was situated and how we can prove from this Mishnah, which now hopefully we understand pretty well, right? What we basically need to find is we need the Mizbeach to be opposite the exit of the Hechal or maybe the Ulam, okay? And that's why it was important to say why the entrance of the Hechal and the Ulam are, because what we need is not the way we saw in the picture on the map. We need that when we walk out of the Hechal, that pile is going to be right opposite us, in front of us when we're walking out of the Hechal. Okay, so now let's go through our possibilities. And again, what we had is, let me just put a little picture here. Okay, this is just happens to be the Mizbeach is Kulo B'Darom in this picture. It's completely in the south, which is the one we saw, right? That was almost completely in the south, that picture. If we put it, let's say here, where I put this little square, which is 4 cubits northward from the Mizbeach, you can clearly see it's not opposite the exit to the sanctuary or the hallway at all. It's all the way on the side. So that's not going to really make sense, okay? And we want to figure out why it's 4 cubits in and not more, really. So my kasavar, what does he hold? I kasavar kulem is be'ach b'darom kai, and that's this picture. If you think the whole thing is in the south, and now let's go to picture number 4. Okay, here we have the numbers. I put the numbers here. So what I drew here are lines, green lines from the exit of the Heichal, and pink lines from the exit from the hallway. Because again, one's going to be a much wider range, and one's going to be a narrower range because the Heichal is much narrower, the opening, whereas the Ulam's opening is double the size. So if it's completely situated on the south, then basically, okay, we're going to ignore the whole north side. That's irrelevant. The opening of the Heichal on the north, that's totally irrelevant to us because we want to find an exit to the Heichal or maybe an exit to the Ulam. We're going to go one by one. That we get to the altar. We want to put it in a place where you're going to walk out of the Heichal and walk into this thing. So basically, it's going to have to be situated somewhere around here. Okay, or let's draw it even better, somewhere between, right, the midpoint of the room, right? So if the Mizbeach is completely in the south, how many cubits in is this? How many cubits to the north are you going to be? Well, you're all the way at the end of the Mizbeach. So, in other words, on the northern side. In order for you to exit from the Heichal and walk into the Mizbeach, right, and be on that, be as close as possible when you get to that spot of the Maracha. So if you say, Kulom Mizbeach b'darom kai, 27 ba'alamete, you need to move, right, from the southwest corner, not 4 cubits, which is here. You need to move 27 cubits, because if you want to get to opposite the exit, first we're talking about just the sanctuary. So if the Mizbeach, it's very simple math. The Mizbeach is 32 by 32. Only the last 5 cubits are opposite the exit of the Heichal, because again, the Heichal is the midpoint, and we're basically, the Mizbeach is all on the south, so we're only concerned with the south side. So 5 of those cubits will be opposite the last 5 cubits of the Mizbeach. So you'd have to move it 27 cubits, and then you'd be right there, okay? That's the least you can move it, right? You can move it 28, 29, or something like that, but the least is 27. And it says 4. That certainly doesn't work. Sorry, one line I missed. And inami kasavar kedushat hecha v'ulam chadehi. Now, if you want to expand it a little and say, look, the sanctity of the ulam is the same as the hallway, is the same as the heichal. It's all one big sanctity. So theoretically, it doesn't really have to be opposite the exit of the heichal. It could be opposite the exit of the hallway. So then you gain another 5 cubits. But okay, what's gaining another 5 cubits? Well, that still puts you at 22 because it's 22 plus 5, right, which is 10 plus 10. So you get to 32. So you need to be 22 cubits in if you wanted to do that. That would make it here, okay? Or, really theoretically, right? Mamash, just 22 cubits, that would be there, and you would still walk out of the Heichal and the Ulam, and you would walk right into it. But that's not what it says. It says 4, not 22 cubits toward the north. Okay, next diagram. Now we're going to try Chetzio, because remember, where are we trying to get to? This can only make sense if you say the whole thing's in the north, okay? So let's go through, but we're going to go through all the options. First, process of elimination. Ikas of our Chetzio b'tzafon v'Chetzio b'darom, half, Chadsrei ba'alamete. You get to 11. Why? Okay, so here's our Mizbeach. It's situated mamash at the midpoint of the room. Now, that means that 5, right? 10 is opposite the Heichal. So 5 on one side, 5 on the other, okay? Meaning 5 is in the north, 5 is in the south, but it doesn't really matter. That's 10. That means on either side of it, there's 11 cubits. So that means if we start at the southwest corner and we want to get to a point where you can see that you can walk out opposite the Heichal, you have 11 cubits on that side, and you got to move over 11 cubits. If you move over 11 cubits, then you'll end up exactly opposite the Heichal. That will put you right here, okay? I'm having trouble making my box, but that will put you right here, okay? And then you walk out, and you're there. Okay, now, if you say, just like before, okay, so again, let's read that. Chadsrei ba'alamete. You need 11. Now, if you say the Heichal and the Ulam are all one sanctity, and you can really leave the Ulam, and that's fine. So that basically means 20. So 20 cubits That's again centered in the room. So how many are going to be to the south side? You're going to be left with six because you have 20, six on this side, six on that side. That's another 12. So that gets you to 32. So six are left. So you need to move 6 cubits into the room and you'll still be opposite the ulam. So that would be another, right? That would be the number that we'd be looking for in that situation, right? You want to be like 6 cubits in. Okay, if I could move that up, I would, but 6 cubits in, and then you'd be fine. But that's not what it says. It says 4. So here, Ella, Kasavar, Kedusha, Decha, Ulam, Chad, Milz, if you say they're the same, sheet by Lamete, you need 6. Sheet is 6. Okay, so therefore, only option, here we finally get to it. La Mishum de Kasavar, Kulim is back, but Safonkai, the whole thing must be on the north. Now, if the whole thing is on the north, theoretically, you could start from the first cubit, right? Because as soon as you leave the Hechal, since the whole thing is on the north, you're going to walk right into the Mizbeach. And then we could put it really on this corner. Okay, what's the problem with putting it on that corner? Well, you still have to move 4 cubits north because, how are we going to explain that? Hane Arba mode, well, Ama Yesod, one of the 32 cubits is on the ground. That's the Yesod, the base. Ama Sovev, one is on the ledge, so get rid of 2 for that. Ama Mekom Kranot, you have the corner of the Mizbeach then in the side, so you got to move in one from that. And Ama Mekom Reglei HaKohanim, Dechimaske Lekame, Tveitu Leika Petach. In other words, the Kohanim need to walk around the Keren. They need some space. So you're not going to stick a wood pile of fire going there. So that's why we move in 4 cubits. And that's the only way to explain the 4 cubits right now. Okay, that's what we think, and that's how we get to. Again, this was all taking the Mishnah, just to review. The Mishnah said they took it, they put the Maracha, where was it? 4 cubits in from the southwest side toward the north 4 cubits. Only makes sense if you say, and then Rabbi Yosi explained, why does it need to be there? Because you need to walk out of the Hechal, or worst case, the Ulam, and get right to the altar. And that's why we have to move it 4 cubits. And we said the only way to come up with that 4 number to explain it is to say the whole thing's in the north. However, I told you the Rav Bar is going to suggest something else. Rav Bar says, no, what are you talking about? Hamani Rabbi Yehudi. Did Tanya Rabbi Yehuda, you could explain this Mishnah. You don't necessarily prove Rabbi Yochanan's opinion that Rabbi Yosi said the home is back was in the north from here. You could go back to the previous diagram, which showed what? Chetzio b'darom, chetzio b'tzafon. What was our problem? Well, so according to Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, we're going to explain this now according to Rabbi Yehuda. Mizbeach memutza v'omeh be'emtza azara. The Mizbeach is centered in the Azara. 32 amot hayulo, it was 32 cubits. 10 amot keneged b'tcho shel Hechal. 10 cubits were opposite the exit of the Hechal. That's this middle, right? 11 amah mikan v'achatesrei amah mikan, right? 11 on either side then. That gets you to 32. Nimtza mizbeach mechuvan keneged Hechal. Okay, and that's how you can explain it. Okay, that doesn't really help us because how can we explain it? Didn't we say it's 6 or 11, right? So self Rabbi Yehuda chatzrei b'aylamete, right? But still, it would have to be 11 over. We were trying to explain 4. How do you get to 4? And ulam this is just a review of what we said. If you say the hechal and the ulam are all one sanctity, and then you get a wider space, but still, sheet b'aylamete, you still need 6. So we need to be 6 cubits over, and that is not what he said, right? He said, right, it would have to be here, basically, where this 5 is, with 6 cubits of space, right, moving over from the north, not 4. So they say, no, I'm going to explain that. Rav Bar says, Mi savar tani arba mo b'hadi ama yesov amasovev. It's all a matter of where you count the 4 from. Okay? 4, now remember, the Mizbeach is 32 by 32, but the top of the altar is only 28 because 1 cubit on either side is the ama, is the sovev, and 1 cubit on either side is the yesod. So if you get rid of those 2 cubits and you say 4 cubits is really 6 cubits, because if you're counting from the yesod, it's 6, right? You count the yesod, the sovev, and then another 4, and that gets you to 6 altogether. Okay, so basically that could be the same. The 4 is really the same as 6. Okay, and therefore he says, right? So who says it's with the yesod and with the ama? Arbamo bar me'ama yesod v'ama sovev. He meant 4 cubits from the top corner of the altar, which is basically the same as 6 cubits from the bottom of the base. Okay? So that's all the same, and that's another way to explain it. To which the Gemara asks, last question for today, V'nukma ke Rabbi Yosi u'b'memutza. Wait, if you could say, now what was the whole thing? Rabbi Zera said that Rabbi Yochanan said that it's on the north side, according to Rabbi Yosi. Now, then he tried to prove it from this Mishnah and said, well, this Mishnah proves it has to be completely in the north because it's the only way to explain it. And then we'd say it's Rabbi Yosi. To which they say, right, Rav Ada said, what do you mean? You could say it's Rabbi Yehuda and it's half-half. To which they say, why don't you suggest, if you really want to reject Rabbi Zera, why don't you just say, this is Rabbi Yosi, and Rabbi Yosi puts it half-half. In other words, use this explanation and attribute it to Rabbi Yosi and completely reject what we said before, that Rabbi Yosi thinks the whole thing's in the north. To which they answer a very clear and obvious answer, which is Mishum Rabbi Yosi Shmana le memutza behedya. Because he had a tradition that Rabbi Yehuda was known to have said that the Mizbeach is situated mid, half on the north, half on the south, and that's why he said, let's explain it as Rabbi Yosi and it's half-half, Rabbi Yehuda and it's half-half, instead of saying, let's explain it like Rabbi Yosi and it's half-half. Okay? So that's what we're going to do for today. Rav Shrevia is going to start a whole new one, which is another rejection by saying, wait, I can explain this 4 cubits according to Rabbi Yosi Aglili, and that's going to all depend on the placement of the kiyor, the basin, and that we're going to see tomorrow. So what did we do today? We started with the Mishna that talked about slaughtering on top of the altar, and is that permitted? And where on the altar is it permitted? It's clearly permitted. Is it permitted on half, the northern half, or is it permitted anywhere? We thought Rav Asi wanted to say that whole debate is connected to the whole thing of where the Mizbeach is situated. Rabbi Zera said, no, it's not. Showed why it's not. From there, we had a side tangent, which is, it was all based on some other statement they made about Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, which we had to understand. What do you mean under the altar? Then we basically spent the rest of the daf trying to prove how, because Rabbi Zera said, how could it be that Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Yosi owns this, and I don't see it in the Mishna anywhere, to which he brought this Mishna about where the Marachashniya is situated, having to be opposite the exit of the Hichal, or at least the Ulam, and 4 cubits to the north. That only fits if you say the whole thing is in the north, to which Rav Asi says, no, you could actually explain it also if it's situated half-half, by just saying that the 6 cubits starts in a different place than, the 4 cubits starts in a different place than your calculation of 6, and 4 and 6 are really, they really mean the same thing. And with that, we ended our daf, and we'll see the other difficulty tomorrow and pick up from there. Wishing everyone a good day, and there'll be more diagrams tomorrow with pictures of where the kiyor goes. So wish me luck today in preparing them. Have a good day, everybody.